What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel, or welcome for the first time if this is your first visit to Blake's Garage. Today we have our 2011, I believe it's 2011, GMC Acadia, and this vehicle is making a noise and also has a leak over here from the water pump. So I'm going to just kind of do a brief description on replacing the water pump on this particular vehicle. So what it's doing is just kind of a rattly, screechy, not really a squeaking noise, but kind of a metallic, bad bearing rattle while it's running, and it gets worse as the engine RPM is increased. And it also has a leak. It's dripping coolant, and from looking at things, it's coming from about halfway up over here, right below where the water pump pulley is at. So this is most certainly a water pump replacement. So the first step is to jack up the front end of the vehicle and remove the passenger side tire. Next, you're going to remove, there's actually two pieces here, you can see them down there, two pieces to your fender liner. And what you've got is just a variety of clips where you kind of pry out, I'll show you these clips here, kind of pry out the inside with a screwdriver, or my favorite is the clip removal tool, body clip removal tool. And once you have this inner part pulled out, either all the way or most of the way, you can pry the outer part out. So I think we have, they're just kind of randomly placed around here. We have probably 10 total of those clips, and then about another 10 Torx screws, and those are a T20 Torx. Those run right up the outside here, right by the, I guess I'll say the fender. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 there, 5 there, and then I think 3 here and 2 up underneath from the front. There's 2 right here, and finally 2 clips right here. I'll light them up here. And those are a real similar style where you just pry the inside out and then the outer portion will pop out. So what that'll allow you to do is separate your front half from your rear half on the fender liner. I guess the only other thing you'll have to do is pop this single clip out. This runs through a hole in the fender liner. So you pop that out and then you can slide it out behind that. That's your ABS harness right there. Okay, next, now that we have that removed, we're going to take off our serpentine belt, and the tensioner for that, if you look up right there, that's the tensioner pulley. I believe it's a 1/2 inch drive, just square. You can either put a breaker bar or a ratchet in there, and you're going to act as if you're loosening that, which will pull it back to the left towards the rear of the car. That'll loosen your belt, and you can slide the belt off. And I'm going to do that quick, and then we'll catch up in just 1 second. Okay, so I've got my 1/2 inch ratchet here, and I apologize, you're going to act as if you're tightening, not loosening. That'll make sense in a hurry there. If you try to loosen, you'll notice that the belt is getting tighter. So you actually want to act as if you're tightening, and you can see there when I pull on that, it puts some slack in the belt. So I'll have to set you guys down, but I'm going to pull this back and then slide my belt right off of the AC compressor there in the front. I think that's the easiest pulley to access. So kind of my setup here is I have my left arm running behind the strut to grab onto the ratchet, and I'm going to use my right arm to pull the belt off. Be right back. So the belt is off, and I think I'm going to go ahead and just get it all the way out of my way. In some cases you can just kind of leave it hanging here, but I think it's going to be a lot more trouble than it's worth to leave it hanging. So I'm just going to disconnect that. One nice thing is you actually have access up through this passage right up there where you can access pulleys and wrenches and belts and things versus having to do everything from the bottom here. So kind of with 2 hands, I'm going to wiggle this belt around and get it pulled out. And then our next step will be to remove the pulley from the water pump itself. So I'll try to get the lighting and camera set up to show you how I'm going to remove those 4 pulley mounting bolts. I'll do my best to show this here. So we're looking up at the water pump pulley there, and what you have are 4 10mm bolts to get that removed. There's two ways you could do this. You could either do it while your belt is still on, so that way the tension of the belt keeps the pulley from spinning, and you can just work your way around to the 4 bolts with a 10mm wrench, then take your belt off and the pulley will basically fall off. The way I'm doing it, which I guess it's just up to your own preference what you want to do, the way I'm doing it is with 2 10mm wrenches. I've got one set to tighten and one set to loosen, so I'm using this one on tighten to hold the pulley and fight this wrench on loosen. So I'll loosen one and then move both wrenches to the next set. I'll hold one with that and loosen the next one with this and work my way all around, and these really aren't that tight, so you could almost just hold it with your hand would be a final option, just to keep it from spinning to get those bolts out. So we'll get this off, and then that will take us down to our mounting bolts for the water pump, which we'll remove, get everything cleaned up, and put the new pump back in. So I'll get this off and be right back with you. So here's where we're at now. Here's the pulley, I just got it off. No problem at all. And you can see, I'll steady the camera here, right there is the water pump, and everything below that point is just wet and coated in grime. And if you look way down at the bottom where it's actually dripping, it is orange. So it's orange Dexcool coolant, which is leaking from right there, from the water pump. So what I like to do at this point is take a look at my new part. So I'll take you over here, show you the part number and everything. I use the Murray new versus the remanufactured. This is a CP5103. And what I like to do, get a little light here, 1 second. Is actually take a look at the pump itself. That way you can kind of follow along and see how many bolts there are, where they're located, anything weird that's going on when you take this off. So one thing we'll have to do is orient it in the way that it is on the car, which I'm not 100% sure of right now, but it's not a big deal because if we look, this is pretty straightforward. We're just going right around the perimeter. All the bolts are probably going to be the same length, and we're going to have 6 of them total. So 6 bolts, basically in an oval, circle oval, right around the perimeter of the pump. We'll remove those, and we know that there's nothing weird or hidden or anything like that. And I guess one way I had mentioned we need to know how this is oriented. If you look here at the bottom, we have our weep hole. When the bearing fails, that's what weeps out little bits of antifreeze. And that's going to be oriented at either the 12 or 6 o'clock. So we'll go take a look at the car and see where we see that hole at. And that'll kind of help us putting it back in as well. So if you look right here, it's not at the bottom, so it's going to be at the 12 o'clock point, right up on top. So I'll kind of spin our water pump on the bench to match. Like so. There's that part we just saw at the bottom. There's a bolt directly below that, and then basically like time on a clock. We've got one at 12, 8, 10 or 11, noon, 2, and 4. Something like that. So I'm going to get those 6 bolts out, and I'll try to catch you guys before I get the water pump off, just to help you with actually prying it or knocking it off of the engine. So hang on 1 second. Alright guys and gals, so we've got our 6 bolts out. A couple things I wanted to mention. The bottom 4 are pretty self-explanatory. Once you get to the top 2, specifically the very top one, the way I did that is I put my hand through here and up just like I did my left hand with all the others, but then it was helpful to kind of look up from here. So I stuck my head up on the right side of this fender support and looked back, and that gave me a view at that bolt head so I could actually see what I was doing. Just helped a little bit. But anyway, I got all of those using my quarter drive flex head ratchet. I don't think the flex was majorly helpful. You could do this with just a regular 1/4 inch drive ratchet. and then a 10 millimeter deep socket made a big difference. So I just basically cracked them loose, and once they were loose, I was able to just spin them out by hand. So anyway, you can see that it's just dripping now. It's just hanging on there. I was not smart, as usual, to drain my cooling system ahead of time. I think 9 times out of 10 I forget and make a huge mess all over everything. So that's what we're about to do now. I'm just going to reach up, left-handed again, grab onto this pulley, or what used to be the pulley, it's now the hub of the pulley, and just give a little pull. And there's all of our coolant. So I did have a pan here ahead of time to help with a lot of that. If you do plan ahead, there's a drain on your radiator that you can actually drain your cooling system with to make a little bit less of a mess. But this actually wasn't too bad. So just popped that off by hand. We'll see if we can kind of pull it out here and have a look at it. And I'll try to explain to you what direction I'm going to actually get this out. I might have to get up there and look. Okay, it seems like if you come to the left of the crank pulley and kind of tip the hub of the water pump outward and down like that, it pulls out just like that. So you'll just kind of wiggle it to the left over here until you feel it pop down. I did not twist it at all. It came out just like this, which is just how it was in there. So that came out. We're going to get our gasket surface all cleaned up. One thing that helps with this, actually I take that back. I was going to say it's an O-ring gasket, so less mess. It is not an O-ring gasket. It's a flat fiber gasket. So we're going to have to get up there and clean everything up. I'll probably use my right angle die grinder with the roll-lock disc and lightly clean things. And I'll show you the setup on the new one before we bolt it back in place. Okay folks, we are on the home stretch now, so I need to amend my previous statement about the gasket. It is not a paper gasket, at least in my case. It's a thin metal gasket with just a little bit of like a rubber on there, similar to like a perma-dry gasket. And so you want to make sure that you peel that off. And in my case, it was very clean underneath, so I just gave it a nice spray of brake clean and a wipe down with a rag to get any of this gunky, sandy dirt off of the gasket surface. And now on our new gasket, this one is a paper gasket in my case, and it looks like we also have new bolts, so that's kind of a surprise. So I guess we'll replace those too. But anyway, on this gasket, we're just going to put a very, very thin coat of RTV and set that on there and let it tack up a little bit. Slide this back in place and get our bolts started. So I guess my recommendation would be check on gaskets. If you can get, and I'm going to do the same thing, if you can get one just like the one that came off, I prefer that style just because it goes on easier, you don't have the mess of the silicone, and it'll come off much easier if you ever have to do this job again. So I'm going to call up and make sure they don't have that gasket, and I'll use that instead. But either way, that's our next step, and I'll try to keep you guys right up along with me. Okay guys, I just talked with my local parts store. They could get the same gasket, but it was going to be about 2 days out, so we're not going to do that. This won't be too bad, and I guess we'll anticipate not having to do this job again if we do it right. So, what I've got here, and this is a good idea to put gloves on before you work with silicone. Another thing where you should do as I say, not as I do here. We're just going to put a thin coat of RTV around our new gasket. Very thin coat on both sides. So I'm just working my way around with that. The reason I say wear gloves is this stuff will be on your hands for about the next 3 days, and it will go everywhere. I've got some actually on my pants right now that will not wash out, so gloves are a good idea. Just a little bit more. I have found that RTV black seems to be pretty universal. I guess blue would technically be recommended for something with water or coolant related. Water pump bolts, water pump itself, things like that. Lower intake gaskets. But black seems to do about everything. So that's about what that's going to look like. Just a thin coat, like I said. I'm going to let this tack up just a little bit so that when I put it on my water pump, it'll also act as kind of a glue. So that'll keep it in place as I maneuver it back up in there. We want to make sure it doesn't shift or get torn or ripped or damaged in any way, I guess is what I'm saying. And that way it's in the same spot when you put your new bolts in, that it lines up and you don't have to take it back out and hassle with it again. So I'm going to put this on my water pump, and it'll only go one way. Looks like about like so. Kind of hard to show you. About like that though. So I'm going to push that down here on the bench, let it tack up just for a couple minutes, and then slide this back up in the car and start getting it torqued down. So I'll let you know in just a second on torque specs and sequence, and basically after that we're going to bolt our pulley back on and put the belt on, and we're done. So I'll be right back with an update here in a second. Here's how the pump looks with the gasket all tacked up and sort of glued in place. So just be as gentle as possible putting that back in, and you'll keep it right where it needs to be when you put the bolts through. So that's a little bit helpful. I've already battled it twice without letting it kind of dry up just a little bit before I started. So I'm going to give that a try and get all my bolts started, and then I'll let you guys know on the sequence and torque. My guess is the sequence is just going to be kind of a star pattern if possible, and I'll have to check on the torque, but it's not going to be much at all. It'll be something like 90 inch-pounds, but I'm going to confirm that, and I'll put it in the description as well. So hang with me, and we'll be right back in just a second. Alright, so I've got my water pump. Actually, I dropped my light, but hopefully you can, you can't see up in here. Let me get my light. I got my water pump up in there, and basically just went around and got everything until it was flush. So the bolts were down flush, but not tight. You can see, there it is up in there. The torque spec on those is 89 inch-pounds and a star pattern, just as I thought. Unfortunately, my clicker style wrench only goes down to 120 inch-pounds currently. My beam style will do down to 89, but there's no way I'm going to be able to read the beam and make that work. So basically 89 is just common sense tight with your 1/4 inch ratchet. So right now they're flush. I'm just going to give them just a little bit of a snug and make sure they're all even. It's not going to be that vital. I'm not recommending that you ignore torque specs in general, but in this case 89 inch-pounds is just kind of an industry standard number for common sense tight on a small bolt. So you'll see 89 inch-pounds all over the place on components that are holding plastic covers on, or just small bolts that are supporting, like, for example, a ground wire or a wiring harness or a bracket. It's 89 inch-pounds. So that's what I'm going to do, is just go down, common sense tighten these just so they're basically, here's snug, and then just a little bit of basically. So we're going to get them tight all the way around, get our pulley back on. So for that, here's my pulley. I'm just going to lift it back in there, kind of spin it until I can see through one of the holes and start a bolt, make any slight adjustment to get the next bolt started, and then I'll just do what I did in reverse to get it off. So where I had one wrench set to tighten to hold the bolt and the other one loosening it, now I'm going to hold it with the one that would be loosening it as I tighten, and that one's just going to spin around and lock up against another bolt as I tighten down. It's kind of hard to explain, but those really aren't that tight either. So we're going to snug those down, and then I'll get my belt back on, and that's basically it. So I'm afraid I'm probably going to leave you there just because I can't actually show what I'm doing very well, but I hope that this video has been helpful to get you on your way. There's nothing that difficult that's going to come up from this point on other than just reassembly. So as always, if you do have any questions, make sure to let me know in the comments. I'm usually pretty responsive right when I get a comment. I can help you out. So if you're sitting there with your vehicle waiting to figure out what to do with something, I can usually get back to you in pretty short order. So thanks for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next video.